Over the years, we've built some great gardening beds. 2x4s, 2x8s, and even some biggie size 4x8s. All from wood and all pretty much lasting a decade plus. Great stuff, but nothing truly lasts forever, and some of these beds are nearing their end of life. Perfectly fine, because after 12 to 13 years of epic bounties, these garden beds owe us nothing. Raised beds, though, like pots or fabric grow bags, are just containers. It's the soil inside them that does all the work, which is why we can't simply tear these guys down, dig and excavate out all that soil, and build a new one over top. That would undo years of work and diligent conditioning. We can, though, build new ones that act as a sleeve that'll fully envelop the old ones that are falling apart. So today, I'm going to take these brand new metal garden beds from Vigo and retrofit them over my old existing wood ones. I'll show you what that looks like, because if you've ever done vegetable gardening in wood raised beds, well, at some point you'll be doing this too, or at least some version of it. Despite calling this an upgrade, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm down on wood. In fact, I think it's a superior choice for raised garden beds in most situations. Fully customizable in terms of both height and dimensions, and the initial costs are much easier to swallow than metal or plastic. But from what I can see, most people tend to either switch up the style or switch up the materials whenever they're outright replacing an old garden bed. Banging together 4 new boards to replace 4 older ones is probably pretty common, I'm sure, but it also doesn't make for a very interesting video. So, our main dilemma today is that we have these new slightly skinnier beds that we have to fit over top of the older, wider ones. Not to mention, we've also got these rounded corners to think about. Cutting, sawing, or chopping is in our near future. Let's have a look at the list of tools that we need to accomplish this, as well as to minimize any of that soil disturbance. The older beds were made from a combination of Douglas fir frames and tops, along with Western red cedar panels. A little bit different than the traditional 4 wood planks slapped together, so dismantling may be a little bit trickier. I want to get the tops off first because they're the widest. Then I can take some measurements and see what we're after. So, to do this, I'm going to turn to my trusty axe. I'm not actually going to chop the wood. Instead, I'm going to use the blunt end of the axe to knock off the bed toppers. Now, I did use quite a few screws to assemble these guys, so I wonder how much force I'm going to have to use to knock them off. Something tells me we're going to be able to do this part by hand. Well, I guess the level of rot, at least on these top boards anyways, makes even the simple axe completely overkill. It seems that I can pull the tops off by hand with ease, as if they weren't even screwed on in the first place. Which surprises me a little, because those tops never even come in contact with the soil. Nevertheless, we now know for certain that these 13-year-old wood raised beds are indeed at the end of life. Pretty easy stuff. So, with those tops off, let's go ahead and take some measurements to see how little of that soil profile that we need to carve off so that we can fit on the new beds. The inside dimensions of the new metal beds are 23 by 94 inches. Measuring the existing soil block profile means we've got a lot more room than I first thought, even with the rounded corners. Now, The new metal garden beds are about 17 inches tall, while the old ones were only 12. So there's going to be a bit of a soil mismatch. I am going to keep any of this old discarded wood, as well as any of the soil that I shave off to act as fill. Still though, we're probably going to have to order some topsoil, and that's okay. There is, however, one more problem that we haven't talked about. Before I retrofit any new garden beds over this area, I've got to figure out what I'm going to do with my trusted green onions. What started as an experiment over 10 years ago has now morphed into this self-perpetuating monster that's a staple of my garden. It can't stay here any longer, so I'll have to dig it up and move it. But fear not, because I've been growing its replacement in the background for the last 8 weeks. The bonus too is that it's always bugged me that this green onion patch was never up fully flush with the end of the bed, and there was always this 1 foot gap where I couldn't grow anything. When I plant this new one, I'm gonna finally solve that. So, let's carefully dig it out and place it in a large fabric grow bag for now. I'm also gonna soak it from below to help mitigate any transplant shock. Even if the stalks become too big and too woody to eat, the flowers of all alliums are the most excellent pollinator attractors. They are a biennial, however, so my new batch won't be flowering this year. That's why I'm taking the extra steps with my old faithful patch here. Okay, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and do some perimeter cleanup so we can finally get these beds in place. I just want to clean up any of those cedar panels that may be sticking out and messing with the clearance of the new beds. They aren't super heavy to pick up and walk around with, but they are pretty awkward. Cleaning up before lifting the beds into place, especially the sides here where some of those cedar planks are sticking out, is going to make things a million times easier. Also, where the 2 beds meet in the middle, I'll shave off that soil so that the rounded corners can fit nice and neatly. Hopefully this will be enough and I won't have to fine-tune it too much because I'm about ready to be done with this project. Okay, with all that prep done, let's go ahead and finally get the new beds in place. As we mentioned, the metal garden beds aren't heavy. They're just awkward, especially with just one person. Of course, they're not going to slide on nice and perfectly. That's to be expected. Width-wise, they are a little snug, so we're going to have to do some reshaping and alterations as we go along. Nothing too crazy, and with a little time, patience, and some finesse, they slide over nice and easily, and more importantly, level. Let's go ahead and get the second bed and do the same thing. Now that I know what I'm in for and what I'm up against, this bed goes in much faster and much easier. It's amazing how much taller they are than the old beds though, and it's going to take a lot of soil to fill these guys up. All good. Finally glad to have these beds in place so that I can start growing in this space again. Now, it was a decent amount of work and we did cover some key points of bed replacement. However, it was nothing too difficult, nothing too crazy. So, instead of the usual recap, let's go ahead and put up a list of pros and cons for growing both in metal and wood garden beds. Although they're almost always more expensive, metal garden beds are so durable, and they can virtually last forever, negating the disadvantage of those early startup costs. However, they're not nearly as customizable as the wood ones are, and there's also a school of thought out there that the metal ones heat up and cool down much too fast. Whichever material you go with, there are a few rules that I like to observe whenever I'm raised bed gardening. First, I try to keep them under 20 inches in height. Sure, it's nice to work in the taller beds, but the higher you go, the more soil you gotta fill them with. As for the width, try to stay to 2 feet or less if you can only access one side of the bed. Reaching across 4 or even 3 feet to weed or harvest is just not any fun. Choose the sunniest location with decent drainage and don't worry so much about the east-west or north-south orientation. Honestly, keeping it simple is the way to go, and it's why raised bed growing is my favorite way to garden. Hopefully today's video provided some insight on what it takes to fully replace an aging garden bed should the need ever arise for you. As always, happy growing, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.